Alright, so today I'm going to go ahead and cover a little bit about the differences between weldments, which is the existing way that we create structural members, and structure systems, which was introduced for the first time in 2019 last year. So I'll go ahead and go for a quick Weldments overview just to refresh ourselves. A lot of you probably know these tips and tricks, and if not, then enjoy. How we get these individual detail members on drawings and cut list, and then we'll go over a few 3D sketch tips and tricks. So once we get a good baseline, we'll go ahead and jump into structure systems and see what the differences are. So let's first check out weldments. So we'll make a basic skid for this example, and I'll just start off by doing my center rectangle. And the biggest thing about using weldment features versus doing normal sketching and part modeling is instead of sketching the shape that we want and then where we want the shape to go, controlling it with a feature like an extrude or a sweep in another sketch, we just use the weldment profiles to determine the shape, and all our sketches have to be is where we want the members to be. So we'll make a real quick skid here. And a lot of times for weldments, because we're doing essentially a multi-body part, because the weldment feature functionality does not merge the solids together, that's how we're able to get the individual detail items and stuff on our drawing for manufacturing. So it doesn't merge all that kind of stuff together, and because we get these things that come off in all obscure angles and all that kind of stuff, it generally will require some type of 3D sketching. Now, those of you that have tried just 3D sketching from the start will probably say that it's probably pretty frustrating. Because we're not locked into a specific plane, 3D sketch plane, which we can add, it gets really, really tedious to go through and start having to do all these things. So I typically try to create my 3D sketches, but I'm just using 2D geometry to get there. Let me show you what I'm talking about. First, let me go ahead and add another plane for the top of my skid. And the quickest way to add a new plane, did y'all guys know this trick? I'm gonna take that as a no. Alrighty. So if you hold down the control key and zoom into a plane, you'll see that quadrant arrow. And if you just hold control, you can drag and quickly add another plane that's just offset from an existing one. So that's a really quick and easy way to create this secondary location just to convert the first sketch that I created. Now, the 3D sketch to connect all this stuff is nothing but straight lines, and I don't have to worry about like where I'm locking into planes or any of that kind of stuff. And we can create our skid pretty quickly, right? I prefer to do a different method. Let's start with the same initial rectangle sketch, just the kind of the outline of our skid. Only I'm going to go ahead and apply a normal boss extrude. I'll do, I think I did 60. So we'll do a boss extrude, and then I'll go to my 3D sketch. I can use that solid just to convert entities on all these members. And essentially this is my quick trick for 3D sketching. So it's still a 3D sketch, but I don't actually have to sketch in 3D anything. So once I'm done with the 3D sketch, I don't need that solid for my weldment feature, so I'll go ahead and delete out that body. Oh, looks like I lost an edge. We'll play with it. So from here, we're ready to go ahead and apply those structural shapes or the profiles at the locations where our sketch is. So I'll first tell SOLIDWORKS, hey, I'm making a weldment. It knows not to merge it. And then I'll say what structural members we want to use. So I'll just go ahead and pick some like ANSI inch. Now, the first thing is just loading which standard you want to follow. ANSI, ISO, there's tons of different ones that you can download. And by the way, you'll download them from the Design Library Customer Center over here. Then you'll pick the profile that you want. Angle iron, C-channel, pipe, whatever you've got. Those generally have configurations with different sizes. Now, here's the first and biggest difference between structure systems and weldments. Weldments uses groups. Structure systems don't use groups, right? So I'll come back to that idea in a few minutes once we see the difference. But from here, I can just pick on the lines that I want to assign. Now those groups are used once I have another member that comes off in a different area. This is adding more than 2 members to a joint. It's also coming in a different plane, which tells me that I need a new group. And my imaginary one right here. Then I can add my last group to get my finalized shape. Now, we didn't sketch the profile. So where is the profile in relation to our sketch? Well, that's what we have to use the rest of this, a lot louder. Use the rest of this property manager for here. Everything about the corners, where the profile itself is located in relation to the sketch, that's all controlled with these property manager buttons right here. So if I want to use end butts rather than 45 miters, I would just do this and switch those. You can mirror the profile if you had something that wasn't symmetric like square tube. But to reposition that, generally I want to sketch like the outside envelope of a skid. So then I would want to come in and locate my profile probably somewhere like this bottom point. Those profile sketches just have a bunch of points in them, and anywhere you click a point, you can just relocate that profile relative to that point by clicking that button there. So now, with that bottom one, and we'll relocate these as well. The fun thing is when you edit the location, it doesn't tell you which one you're editing, so you have to find it. Oh, there it is. There it is. Move that one in, and do the same thing for the last one to close it out. So if we want to rotate that profile, again, if we had a C-channel or maybe an angle that we run a rotate 45, we would rotate that with this angle here. This alignment button, if you're trying to align that profile with some other reference entity in your file, right? That's what that button's used for. So in a nutshell, real quick, that's kind of an overview of Weldments and what we've been doing so far on the modeling side. Notice because we put that weldment feature in there, we've been using those structural member features that we automatically get this cut list. So this is the exact cut list that you'll see instead of a bill of materials on your drawing. So we can customize this to have a default length. If we don't have any special end treatments or whatnot, we can call that out in our cut list, let our fab know without a detailing view. Anything else just comes default description for the profile and what you customize here in your list. When you go through your list, you'll see that behind it'll automatically identify identical members. And a good rule of thumb too, while you're using weldment members, I try and suggest using patterns and mirroring a lot just to make sure that if you have like weld prep for like bevel welds, you don't forget to add a chamfer or something on one side and then end up with a separate cut list item because the members aren't identical. So try and use a lot of patterns and features if you can. Let's go ahead and throw this on a drawing real quick so we can quickly see how to get those individual members on the drawing. I'll just throw an isometric on there. And the way that we would get maybe just one of these is by going to Insert, Drawing View. We want to make a drawing view that's relative to the model that we have. So first, you want to make sure you have that model open in another window so that you can hit Control-Tab and quickly get to it. And instead of saying we want it in drawing view relative to the model of the entire part, we want a model view just of selected bodies, and that's how we get just individual detail item drawing views on our print. Because these things can be crazy 3D sketches off at weird angles, it may not be in the same orthographic projection that we want our main part to be in. So we can determine a new orientation from here just based on the body. And you can even pick views that aren't part of that, or edges, faces that aren't part of that body. As soon as you hit green check, it'll automatically switch back to your drawing without hitting Control Tab or anything like that. And there's my individual member. Of course, we'll insert the cut list that we saw in the model, a really big one. Then we can link all of our detail items to that. So that's kind of the technology that we've had. Does anybody in here use Weldments a whole lot? I know some of you do. Has anybody played with the new structure system functionality yet? No. Awesome. So let's take a look at structure systems. Let me first recap what they gave us out of the What's New documentation from last year. And the way that we define our members is a little bit different. You'll notice that I don't have a bunch of sketches here. I have two surfaces. It's just a hexagon that's an extruded surface, so surfaces, of course, have no thickness. And when I say that I have a structural system, then I'm presented with an option. I have primary members or secondary members. And of course, because of the first one, I'm going to select primary members. And the way that we define these, again, I have surfaces here, is you can either do point or length members, which is normal sketches, right? Or edges of surfaces. That'll also be recognized without having to sketch each individual line, right? So remember that little trick that I was showing a second ago where you extrude it with a normal solid, then delete it? That's kind of like what it's doing here, only instead of a boss extrude, they're doing a surface extrude. So that's a good way to think of it. The other cool thing about structure systems is you don't have to worry about groups. So I can get all that kind of stuff in a drag and drop rather than having to go and pick each individual one, look at how they're connected, and then go pick a new group and keep going down the chain. Let me see, I'll use square tube again. I'm trying to get at least some kind of preview. So that's how we define all of our shapes. Again, these use actually the same profiles that Weldments do, so it's not extra geometries that you have to create. It uses the same data to create it, and it works kind of the same. We just put where we want the members to be. It's the member definition that is very, very different. So in addition to doing those length members, we can also define it by planes, just specifying lengths along planes, or by points in a length, or by an intersection of a plane and maybe a face. And this one is really only used for trying to create like curved geometry, so I'll come back to that one in a minute as well. I'll go ahead and confirm this one. You'll see I'm still in my structure system member. I'll go ahead and create, let me first change these. Y'all notice that I didn't have to get in and edit any features to go edit geometry. As long as that structure system button is still selected, you can come in and make changes to anything you need in here. So let's say for these, again, I'm not switching features or anything. This is going to be round tubing. I'm not having to get in and out of anything. It's really quick. Let me go ahead and show this other sketch that I have here. I'm going to create some more primary members. Okay. I don't need to change the profile for this one, but I did want to point out this pierce point. That's essentially the locate profile that we have in weldment systems. That's where we say where the profile is relative to whatever reference entity we're using, whether that be a surface extrude or a sketch or what have you. So this is going to be that. This alignment down here is the same thing. So is the rotation. Those buttons are identical to how they are in Weldments. They've just kind of renamed the pierce point to locate profile is what they did. So I'll go ahead and use what they've got there. Now notice as I'm building this thing, look what's happening at these corners. Looks kind of ugly, huh? Yeah? It's different from the Weldment profile where I had the corner option within the profile definition. When I'm assigning my groups, for each group I can say what kind of corner treatment I want for that specific group. With this one, you don't get any corner treatment options until you exit the structure system feature. So we'll come back to that after we add some secondary members. Secondary members has two different ways to define their profiles. So we can either do it at plane locations or by using two other members as a reference. So I've got a couple planes in here. Here and here will be the locate. And then I want to say where I'm connecting those secondary members in between, right? So I'm just going to click on primary members to have them connect. I'll use the chain function so I don't have to get in and out of it, and I can go around the cage at one time. Picked the wrong one for the last click. That looks better. So at these two locations, I'm just connecting the members around with that chain. I'll show you an example of this method here in just a few minutes. That's how we can create those secondary features. Once I exit the structure system, that's when I look at the corner management. Now this corner management tool is very similar. It essentially behaves the same way, but the buttons just look a little bit different. So this stuff over here is all planar trims, and this would be like a miter. And it breaks them out based on the corner it recognizes. So a simple corner management or simple corner is just where two members meet. If you have more than two, that's considered a complex corner. So I need to make my decision about what I want to do on each of the edges for both the simple and the complex. Notice that I've got a little node right here. Now I'm looking at all the complex corners, which of course where I've got multiple members meeting in at once. Everywhere where you see a node is where you can change the corner management for that specific corner. Otherwise, your selection here are going to apply to every corner that is considered that category, whether it be simple or complex. So using these nodes is how we change individual corners. And from that, it's very similar to the Weldments functionality. We get the trim order here, so I'm going to zoom in on this corner and say that this bottom one, I don't want to be trimmed until these have been more mitered 45 or whatever that hex angle is better together. Hey, Santiago, you see that 45? But that's how we handle all the different mitered edges, is by just using this corner management, using the category, and if we need to do something outside of that blanketed category corner, then I would just select on each individual node and make my adjustments there. Once you get out of the corner management tool, you'll see your cut list will build. So I've got those two surface bodies and about 54 members here. Now, we can go ahead and use that for a circular pattern. Member patterns and mirroring is good for weldments. Same goes for structure systems. Let's say I'm going to go ahead and pattern all these bodies, not the surface body. Like so. Of course, you can come back and do some cleanup, hide the surfaces or whatever reference geometry you use to create those structural members after the fact. But the member definition is just very, very different. The way that it deals with corners is also a little bit different. I want to point out something else as well. Notice on the Weldments, there's some other features that we just didn't cover. There's a trim extend tool, end cap, gussets, there's a weld bead. Those are really the four buttons that are in the Weldments toolbar other than the structural stuff that you would really use. I use NCOT and the trim extend quite a bit. So I was kind of confused when I first came into structure systems, wondering how I'm going to do all that extra stuff, right? You'll notice that structure systems does not have any of that. So that's the first big difference. So can we use end caps on structural members? You would think it's the same profile, but you can't. You can't use the trim and extend. You have to only use the tools available here. So I bring that up because let's pick and choose about when we're going to use structural features to determine our members, or we're going to use weldment features. Now before we get into that, let's first look at some of the enhancements. Now, this is SOLIDWORKS 2020, as I just mentioned, in beta, which is why that one rectangular member kind of showed askew. So this is all the enhancement that they added with 2020. I'm gonna go ahead and go back into structure systems, primary members, and a lot of the enhancements were really about these point members, about how we determine them with points. I didn't do that earlier, so I'll go ahead and show these enhancements here. This first one is just you say a point, and then how long reference that point and where the normal to is. So this next one, I'll go ahead and select the chain option, and I've got a few points here. It's just going to daisy chain and follow you around from point to point. Let me go ahead and select a different profile. We can get a pretty good idea. So that's one of the first ways that they've changed the member creation. The next thing is this up to point. So let me go ahead and get rid of this one here. And I'll say go up to that point. Essentially, this is just looking for a normal to direction. Where's the start, where's the end, just as you would in a line. The up to plane is another nice one to use. You'll just essentially say where you want it to terminate. And the cool thing about this is it gives you a long direction. I really like this. This is the same type of button that's in your extrude with direction. You don't always need a sweep if you don't have a curve, right? You can just do an extrude with direction. You can do the same thing with your member definition here with 2020 at least. I'll go ahead and get rid of this one and go straight up. Now from here, there's also quite a few enhancements that they've done to the secondary member definition. So I don't need a chain for this one, but I'm going to say in between these two first members that I created and at the location of all these planes is where I need more items. Of course, I can change the profile without having to change features. And the profile area is, again, this pierce point. That's the locate profile that we have in Weldments. So that's how I'll relocate that sketch relative to my profile. Now this next one we haven't done yet. So this is in between members essentially. So I'm going to say in between this one and this one, I need an item, and we can either do it by a ratio of the members that we used for reference or by a distance. I'll go ahead and use a distance here and just go corner to corner. One of the other big enhancements that they had in 2020 was you can now split the members while you're defining them. So remember how I said you didn't have like that trim extend tool like we do in Weldments? Well, this is essentially the answer to that. We're going to use this split and either use a dimension or some other reference that we've got, whether it be a plane or a body. I'm going to use these two bodies that we've got, not the plane. Rotate this one 90. Oh, it goes 90 the wrong way, huh? Thanks. All right, let's go ahead and exit out of our structure system so we can look at the corner management. Of course, I already noticed this one is extruding. Oh, now it's fixed. Y'all see that? I'm not crazy. It was wrong earlier. So we'll do a planar trim on this one instead of the miter. And again, for this one, we have the categories of corners, the very simple, the two member, and complex. We have another one in this one. I'll use a planer for all of them. Go ahead and hide, just take a look at that. Now here's one of the other big enhancements that they added to 2020. Within the pattern, you may have seen it earlier. We'll do 6. But instead of patterning bodies, I can actually pattern structural features. Now what's the difference? Well, it's really just how many clicks it takes you to get there. Because the structure systems is of course going to bring up all the body intelligence that it has within its own split members and whatever kind of angle adjustments and locate profiles you've done within that definition. If you do the same thing with bodies, it's going to work the same way, only with bodies I have to go and pick a whole bunch of things, and in a larger, more complex 3D sketch, that would be really tedious. So from here, I'll just use my flyout tree and say, I'm going to do a circular pattern of my structural system feature. I'm going to come straight back into structure systems, and the way I got back into it is just come to my tab, say structure system. I'm now going to add secondary members in between those patterns. So you don't have to go and sketch any new geometries. I'll say let's use a chain. And at all these plane locations that we've already got. Once again, when you exit, that's when you'll be prompted with the corner management tool to make all your selections. And then we've got secondary members that were used off a pattern of the structure system feature. Those can be patterned again, of course. It's just a secondary structure, essentially. Here's my structure system 1, my structure system 2 down here. If I would have made it a little bit bigger, we could have put a bullfighter in there or something. But so that's kind of the new stuff that they've added in 2020. I kind of like it because as a big Weldments user, I was kind of frustrated. Part of it's habit, used to having so many of these end caps and gusset tools and that kind of nice functionality is just built in. I would hope, I know I've submitted some enhancement requests, that maybe they'll give us these buttons for the structure systems tab moving forward. But I wanted to compare a few things. I'm going to come back. If I wanted to evaluate and see whether structure systems is a better way to go or Weldments is a better way to go, what's a good way to find that out? Add something that's not a structural shape. To find out which one is better to use, like performance-wise? Oh, are you talking about for like end cap creation and stuff? Yeah, you could just do a normal extrude. Right. And there's no difference in the way that we deal with plates between Weldments or structure systems. It's just a boss extrude, and then you would define, the thickness and whatever material you've got from your cut list here via right click. So if I wanted to see if a structure system or the weldment features were better to use, right? Why did they give us a new tool? It's doing the same thing, isn't it? Kind of. So I wanted to come up with some examples to benchmark this thing rather than just the default SOLIDWORKS files that they give us for the What's New videos. So I was looking out and I have lucky enough to have a window and I can see a bunch of billboards, which is where I came up with the idea for the model. So I just Googled a bunch of billboard pictures and found a bunch of triangular shapes. And of course, I made up my own dimensions, an imaginary world, to mimic that billboard. So I modeled it both ways. I did it once with Weldments, once with structure members. I compared how much time it took to model both of them, and then once they're modeled, what's the performance difference on the solids afterwards? Theoretically, they should be the same, right? Same number of faces, same number of edges, all that kind of stuff. The only difference is the features. So let me go ahead and pull up my structure system billboard. Same thing, you'll notice a smaller feature tree because essentially structure system houses all your profiles instead of having a different structure member for each type of profile that you have like we do in Weldments. Notice we have different features here. Other than that, the model's the same. So a good way to evaluate this is just by simply going to performance evaluation and looking at rebuild times, right? Regardless of what's causing the rebuild time, we can see the things that are impacting that time based on percentage and physical time still rebuilds really, really quick, right? But for comparison purposes, I'm seeing that this one's rebuilding in about 0.91 seconds, right? Let's come back to the structure systems. Now, you'll notice that I just copied, I hid all these sketches, but I just copied and pasted all my sketches. Notice there's a boss extrude and a body delete in there. I do really use those tricks in real life. Then I come in with my structure system. So the starting point was the same. I made sure I had identical sketches. I made sure that my appearances matched, all that kind of stuff that I'm comparing apples to apples. But look what I got on my rebuild time. 2.34. It's quite a big difference. Would you say? I mean, still it's not long, but once we get into bigger systems, or maybe we put these structural items into a large assembly, these things really have a big performance impact, right? So why would I bring that up? I asked myself that as well. But I figured it'd be a good idea to at least evaluate the two things in between them. And I really do like the structure systems functionality. I see a lot of potential there. I like not having to get out and redefine things, the simplicity about member creation, because I don't have to go and do a bunch of 3D sketches. I can just do a bunch of surface extrudes essentially if I want. For the moment, I kind of see structure systems as a quick GA tool. I wouldn't necessarily make manufacturing prints from it because of the performance, but not just the performance. It took me quite a bit longer to model this one using structure systems versus Weldments. Well, I just did a save as once I had my sketches, so all it is the member definition, right? And we saw that with structure systems, we can box select and get a whole lot of identical members and even mix and match really quick. So what's the time? The time is all in the corner management, because each one of these corners in here, let me hide some of these faces. Each one of these members in here, I had to come in and edit manually. When I exited structure system, I had to come in and click on each individual node to make sure that they lined up correctly. That was my biggest pet peeve, is just dealing with how they're trimmed and cut together. If we've got simple stuff that doesn't have complex trimming, or it doesn't matter whether this one's flat or mitered or planar or whatever it is, then great, we can define those members really quickly using structure systems. Again, the weight is the same, and if we're just trying to get a quick design idea or a concept, structure systems is much, much faster to create, again, if we're not worried about details like corners. Because I can create this structure in 3 seconds if I have the sketch with structure systems. But to make a manufacturing print, I'm not really there yet. I've got a lot of tedious work to do with all my corner management tools. That's some of the really big main differences that I've noticed between these. So I know I've got a few minutes left, but I wanted to open it up. I thought there was going to be more questions, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people have used structure systems yet. Awesome.
How do you feel about editing after the fact? I mean, I know what it takes to do editing on the different groups and Weldments, and it's fairly easy, but comparison about the ease of editing on that.
I would say that the editing on structure systems could possibly be easier, because all I have to do is like say structure member, and I can redefine what any of these are, or just by editing that one I've got here. So if I needed to change a profile or what have you, I can just select them for the tree, whichever one I want to select, and then change the profile real quick. I don't have to edit multiple structural features like I do with Weldments. So it could potentially be quicker. However, it's a little bit, because it's all housed within one feature, I think maybe that's why the performance is maybe different. Because again, it's just the feature that's different, all the sketches, faces, all that, it's all the same, right? So I think it's just because the feature itself is just much more complex that it's harder to read. So as far as editing goes, editing weldments, the features are separate, which is more like anything else in SOLIDWORKS, whether it be, surface modeling or anything else. The modeling technique is the same. There's not really a lot of other SOLIDWORKS tools off the top of my head that house a whole bunch of functionalities in one, like Structure Systems kind of does. So I guess that's how I feel about it. But again, the biggest thing for me was it was real tedious to come in and edit each one of those corners and say, oh, this one's trim order 1 or 2, vice versa.
Yeah.
What was the file size difference?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me not say.
Repeat that question. Repeat her question.
Oh, she asked how big the file size difference was. So it looks like this is the weldment run. It's about double. 1,500. No, it's not double. Maybe 25% more. About 1,600 to 2,100. So not only is it a performance, rebuild, it's the size. Which is really interesting because you would think that a new tool would like that would kind of be the inverse. Question? No, you cannot. I'm glad you asked that because that was my first thing. I was like, oh, well, awesome. I can just use structure members to create all my members, and then to do all the trimming and stuff, I'll just, switch over to weldments and do end caps or whatever I want, but it doesn't let you mix and match. That's one of the things I was saying. You would think that you could because they use the exact same profiles for their profile definition. But you can't mix and match features. So end caps don't work, gussets don't work in Structure Systems. That's all normal extrudes for plate. Or go ahead.
What if you do part of the frame using structurals and then part of it using weldments?
It won't let you put a weldment feature in there if it sees a Structure System feature in your tree. That's the problem. If it sees anything Structure System in your tree, you won't be able to add a weldment thing in there.
Is this going to be an add-in that you can choose?
Yeah, in 2019, it's an add-in. It comes with any of your standard CAD tools, just like surfacing and sheet metal.
Is the cut list generated the same way?
Yeah, the cut list, how you create the drawing views, all that is the same. It's really just the member creation that's the big difference. All right, unless y'all have more questions, that's all I got for you guys.